12 ancient structures in the bush. Around Melbourne, no one can explain something strange has been sitting in the bush around Melbourne for a very long time. Not ruins left behind by European settlers. Not relics from the gold rush era. These are structures of stone, carved channels, aligned rocks, and earthen formations that predate any written record, and no one in the mainstream archaeological community can agree on what they actually are or who built them. Some of them are in national parks. Some are buried under blackberry scrub just 40 minutes from the CBD. A handful have been studied by university researchers who walked away with more questions than answers. And a few of them have been quietly removed, fenced off, or reclassified as natural formations without any satisfying explanation for why that reclassification was necessary or who authorized it. We are going to take you through 12 of them today. We are going to look at what has been found, what has been measured, what the land itself looks like around each site, and what the experts and the elders have said about them. And at the end of this, you will understand why a growing number of researchers believe that the bush country around Port Phillip Bay was not empty wilderness before 1788. It was a landscape that had been shaped, managed, and marked by people for a very, very long time. This is what survives. The first site is not the most dramatic on this list, but it is the one that started the most arguments. Located in the Dandenong Ranges east of Melbourne, partially hidden by fern gullies and regrowth mountain ash forest, there is a series of stone arrangements that follow a ridgeline for approximately 300 metres. Local Bunurong and Wurundjeri knowledge holders have long spoken about this ridge as a boundary marker, a line between different country that was respected across generations. European surveyors in the 1860s noted unusual rock piling in their survey field documents, but attributed it to volcanic activity and moved on. The problem is that geologists who reviewed those same rocks in the late 20th century found no evidence of volcanic displacement consistent with the pattern they were looking at. The rocks are arranged in deliberate rows. Some have been set upright in soil that has clearly been disturbed and then allowed to settle over a very long period. The alignment tracks the ridge crest with a precision that is genuinely difficult to attribute to random placement or natural process. No excavation of this site has been formally published. The stones remain where they are, in the shade of the fern gully, largely unrecorded and waiting. The second structure is found in the Yangs, the granite range rising dramatically from the volcanic plain southwest of Melbourne. Here, on the eastern face of a prominent outcrop that looks out over the Werribee Plain toward the bay, there are a series of pecked grooves and linear marks cut into the granite surface. These are not the circular grinding grooves commonly found across southeastern Australia and used for sharpening tools and processing food. These are different in character and in placement. Some of them are between 30 and 50 centimetres long. They run in near parallel lines across a broad flat rock face that is angled toward the northeast. The angle matters because at the winter solstice, the first light of dawn strikes that rock face directly and illuminates the grooves in sequence from left to right as the sun clears the horizon. Archaeoastronomer Duane Hamaka, who has worked extensively with Aboriginal communities on sky knowledge in southeastern Australia, has noted that solar and stellar alignments in the landscape are far more common than the mainstream record has historically acknowledged. Whether this Yang site represents intentional astronomical marking is not confirmed and may never be confirmed through archaeological methods alone, but the geometry does not look like accident. Moving north and west into the basalt country of the Werribee Plains, the third site is one of the most unusual on this list and one of the most difficult to access today. Embedded in a paddock that has been grazed for over 150 years, there is a low stone wall running for just over 200 metres before disappearing into a drainage channel that was cut by European farmers sometime in the 1880s. The wall is not high. At its tallest surviving section, it stands perhaps 60 centimetres above the current ground surface, but it is wide. The base is over a metre across, and the stones used in its construction are basalt cobbles that do not occur naturally in the immediate area. They have been brought from somewhere else and stacked with flat faces outward in a way that shows clear intent in the construction technique. The wall connects two slightly elevated points in the plain, and its orientation follows the natural low point between them. Elders of the Wadawurrung people, on whose country this sits, have spoken in recorded interviews from the 1990s about structures used to manage water flow and direct eel migrations across the volcanic plain. The Bushland aquaculture system in Western Victoria, which uses exactly this kind of stone channel engineering to manage eel movement through a modified wetland, has now been formally recognised as a World Heritage Site. The Werribee Wall has not received anything close to that attention. It sits in the paddock. The cattle walk past it every day. The fourth site pulls us back toward the coast, to the cliff tops and tea tree scrub above the Mornington Peninsula, on a headland overlooking Port Phillip Bay, set back from the cliff edge in a grove of coastal she-oak where the wind comes off the water in long, cold sweeps. There is a circle of stones, not a casual scatter, a deliberate circle, approximately 8 meters in diameter, with a clear gap on the northern side that functions as an entrance or exit point oriented toward the bay. The stones are not large. They are each between the size of a human head and the size of a watermelon, but they are consistent in size, and they are embedded in the soil rather than simply sitting on top of it, which suggests they were placed with intention and left in position long enough for the earth to grow up and around them over many years. Comparable stone circles have been documented across Victoria and South Australia, many of them associated with ceremonial gathering sites or places of particular significance in a community's movement through country. The specific symbolism varies between nations, but the form itself, a ring of consistent stones with a deliberate opening, is a pattern repeated across thousands of kilometres of Aboriginal country. This one, on the headland above Port Phillip, has been visited, photographed, and referenced in local historical society records since at least the 1970s. It has never been formally assessed or protected. 40 kilometres to the east, in the forests of the Yarra Ranges, where mountain ash grows to extraordinary heights and the creeks run cold over black rock, the fifth site takes the form of something far harder to categorise and far more urgently at risk. This is a set of carved trees, known in the literature as dendroglyphs or culturally modified trees, found on a spur above a creek line that feeds into the upper Yarra system. The carvings are geometric in character. Some are concentric diamond shapes cut into the bark. One is a series of connected chevrons running vertically down the trunk of a large old-growth mountain grey gum. These trees have been assessed by arborists as being over 200 years old at minimum, which places the carving of them before European contact in this part of Victoria. Carved trees of this type across southeastern Australia are most commonly associated with burial sites, initiation grounds, or boundary markers of significant ceremonial meaning in the cultural geography of a community. The local community group that monitors this site has been in contact with Wurundjeri Woiwurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation about appropriate management of both the trees themselves and the knowledge connected to them. But the trees are declining. Old-growth eucalypts, in this kind of regrowth landscape, face enormous pressure from drought, stress, beetle infestation, and altered fire regimes. When these trees fall, those records go with them permanently. The sixth site returns us to stone. In the low hill country north of Sunbury, on what was historically Wurundjeri country, there is a formation of standing stones on a shallow ridgeline overlooking a seasonal creek system to the east. 3 of the stones are clearly upright and set into the ground rather than resting on top of it. The tallest is approximately 1.5 meters high. The other 2 are progressively shorter, and the 3 form a rough line oriented from southeast to northwest. Around this central alignment, at varying distances, are another 11 to 14 stones that appear to have been placed in a rough enclosing ellipse around the central 3. The whole arrangement spans about 25 meters at its widest point. This is not a henge in the European tradition, and it would be wrong and misleading to apply that framing to it. But standing stone arrangements with clear directional orientation do occur in the Aboriginal archaeological record of southeastern Australia, and the deliberate placement of upright stones in Australian cultural contexts has been documented in connection with sky-watching practice, territorial and boundary marking, and meeting ground designation across many different parts of the continent. The Sunbury Formation has been briefly mentioned in local Shire heritage surveys. It has not been dated, sampled, or studied in any formal capacity beyond a surface description. We move now to what is possibly the most contested site on this list, and the one that has attracted the most attention from researchers outside the formal academic system. South of Geelong, on private farmland, at the edge of the Bellarine Peninsula, the 7th structure is a network of stone channels and shallow depressions that, when viewed from any elevated position or from the aerial photography that has become available through satellite mapping, resolves into a clearly patterned system of considerable extent. The channels are between 30 and 60 centimeters wide. They connect a series of low depressions that fill seasonally with water from winter rain and spring runoff. The pattern is not rectangular in the way that European drainage engineering characteristically tends to be. It curves and branches in a way that mirrors the natural water movement of the landscape while clearly modifying and directing it towards certain points. A hydrological engineer who visited this site informally in 2018 and asked not to be formally identified commented that the system showed evidence of sophisticated understanding of water flow dynamics, slope, gradient, and seasonal inundation patterns. He could not say with certainty that it was not natural. He also could not say with certainty that it was. The landowner has not permitted formal excavation or sampling. The aerial photographs are available if you know where to look. The 8th site is in the Macedon Ranges, in the heavily forested hill country northwest of Melbourne, where the volcanic geology of the plains gives way to granite and folded sedimentary rock, and where the ranges form a physical and cultural boundary between the coast and the inland plains. Here, on a saddle between two peaks that form a natural corridor through the ranges, there is a stone pavement, not a path worn by foot traffic, though it may well have served that function over a very long period. A deliberate pavement of flat stones, none of them enormous, set close together across an area roughly 15 meters by 8 meters on the flattest part of the saddle, where the ground levels out between the peaks. The surface is not level in a formally constructed sense. It follows the natural contour of the land, but the stones are clearly placed with intention. They are oriented with their flattest faces upward. The gaps between individual stones are minimal and consistent. Deep moss and accumulated soil have grown over and around them over what appears to be an extremely long period. This saddle is a known movement corridor through the Macedon Ranges that European travellers were using from the earliest years of the 1830s. What those travellers may not have understood is that the pavement beneath their feet was not something they had made. For the 9th site, we travel south toward the coast to the area of Western Port Bay and the Kuwi-Rup swamp system, once one of the most productive wetland environments in southeastern Australia, and now largely drained and converted to market gardening. On the margins of this former swamp, on slightly elevated ground that would have remained above water through all but the most severe flood events, there are stone arrangements that sit in direct relationship to what were once the natural flow channels of the Bunyip River and its many tributaries fanning out across the flat swamp floor. Some of these arrangements are simple in form, lines of stone that cross what were once shallow watercourses at specific points. Others are more complex, involving what appear to be partial stone weirs with deliberate gaps or openings that would have allowed water and the fish and eels moving within it to pass through in a controlled and directed way. The Boonwurrung people, whose country this is, have maintained oral traditions about the sophisticated management of this wetland environment across many generations, traditions that describe specific features of the landscape in ways that align with what the stone arrangements suggest. The formal recognition of Aboriginal aquaculture in Victoria, catalysed by the World Heritage listing at Budgebim, has opened the door to reassessing these Western Port features with fresh eyes. That reassessment has not occurred. European drainage channels cut across the 19th century have fundamentally altered the hydrology of the system, making it harder to reconstruct what the original stone engineering was designed to achieve. But fragments of that original design still exist in paddocks that were once shallow water, quiet, and entirely overlooked. The 10th site is inland, in the volcanic scoria cone country of the Western District, at the eastern end of the newer Volcanics province, where low cones dot the basalt plain from ancient eruptions. Near the town of Bacchus Marsh, on the rim of a dormant scoria cone that rises perhaps 30 metres above the surrounding plain, there is a carved rock face that has been known to local residents for decades and formally documented only once, in a brief mention in a 1987 regional archaeological survey that was never followed up with any additional investigation or protection. The carving is a set of concentric arcs, 3 of them, roughly but deliberately incised into the reddish basalt of the cone's upper rim. Each arc is approximately 60 centimeters long. They are centered on a single point, and when you stand at the rock face and look outward through the geometric opening created by the arcs, your line of sight aligns precisely with a gap in the distant ranges to the southwest. Through that gap, at the midsummer sunset, the sun descends in direct line of sight from this elevated point on the scoria rim. Whether this alignment is intentional is, as with several of these sites, unconfirmed and may be practically unconfirmable without the cultural knowledge that could contextualize what you are looking at. What is observable is that someone spent time cutting arcs into hard basalt on the rim of this cone with a stone tool, and they stopped when they had made exactly 3. The 11th site is perhaps the most visually striking of all 12, and perhaps the most immediately vulnerable to casual and well-intentioned damage. It is located in a coastal reserve on the Surf Coast west of Torquay, accessible via a walking track that most visitors follow to reach a beach lookout. Just off the main track, in a dense stand of coastal moona trees, whose twisted trunks and grey-green canopy create an enclosed feeling even on a bright day, there is a cluster of large sandstone boulders that have been worked over a significant period of time. The working is extensive and varied. There are pecked basins ground into the upper surfaces of several of the boulders, some of them clearly designed to collect and hold rainwater in a landscape where fresh water can be scarce close to the coast. There are incised lines connecting several of the basins across different boulders, suggesting a designed relationship between the elements. On the face of the largest boulder, oriented west toward the ocean, there are marks that researchers have tentatively identified as representational, though severe sandstone weathering has made confident interpretation difficult. A Wadda Wurrung elder who visited this site in 2015 said the boulders were known in the community's oral knowledge as a resting and gathering place associated with coastal movement and ocean travel. The coastal moona grove around them is protected under local council planning controls. The boulders themselves have no heritage protection at the state level. Nobody has formally proposed that they should. The 12th and final site is different in character from all the others. It is not hidden, it is not in dense bush or on private farmland, or accessible only to those who know where to look. It is in a public park on the northern fringe of Melbourne's suburban sprawl, in a reserve that most local residents drive past on their way somewhere else. And yet, what is sitting in that public park is arguably the most architecturally significant and the most overtly constructed feature on this entire list. It is a raised earthen platform, roughly oval in shape, approximately 30 metres long and 12 metres wide, elevated above the surrounding ground by between 1 and 2 metres. The edges are clearly defined in a way that does not suggest natural deposit. The material from which it is constructed is not local subsoil. It contains significant concentrations of charcoal, marine shell, and worked stone fragment that have been deliberately incorporated into the body of the mound rather than simply accumulating on its surface. Shell mounds and earth mounds across Victoria have been studied as long-term occupation sites, places where communities returned over many generations, leaving behind the accumulated material evidence of their continuous presence. The carbon in this mound has not been formally dated, but comparison with similar features elsewhere suggests it could represent occupation spanning several thousand years at minimum. A playground sits at one end of the park. The mound itself is used as a picnic area on weekends. A plaque near the park entrance mentions that the land holds indigenous significance without specifying what that significance is, where it is located within the reserve, or what the elevated ground that families are eating their lunch on actually represents. Taken individually, any one of these 12 sites can be explained away with enough creative application of natural process. Rocks move, water erodes, patterns emerge in nature that look deliberate to human eyes, wired to find pattern everywhere. This is a necessary caution against over-interpreting the landscape, but 12 sites. Across a radius of roughly 100 kilometres around Melbourne, with recurring features, deliberate stone placement, water management geometry, solar and stellar orientation, carved surfaces on rock and on living trees, elevated earthen platforms, on the country of the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung, the Bunurong, and the Wadda Wurrung, whose oral traditions describe a sophisticated relationship with this landscape, not as wilderness to be endured, but as a system to be actively tended across uncountable generations. The question is not whether Aboriginal Australians modified and engineered their environment. The World Heritage listing at Budge Bim settled that argument. The deeper question is how extensive that modification was in the landscape around Port Phillip Bay, how much of it existed before the city arrived, and how much we have already destroyed without ever understanding what we were looking at. Researchers like Professor Lynette Russell at Monash University and the team at Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung Cultural Heritage Aboriginal Corporation are working to change how this landscape is read before development pressure removes it permanently. They are working against time, against a heritage framework built to recognize the past of a different civilization, one that has always found it difficult to see clearly, the civilization that was already here when the first ships came through the heads. These 12 sites are not definitive proof of anything that cannot already be argued from the broader record. They are 12 reasons to look more carefully, 12 reasons to ask the question before the bulldozer arrives, before the paddock is ploughed another season deeper, before the coastal walking track is widened and the Moona Grove is thinned. Because once you understand that the bush around Melbourne is not empty, and never was, you begin to see these things everywhere. And that changes what this place is, and what it has always, quietly, been.